how do you calculate lost wages in a personal injury lawsuit? So, if you were injured due to someone else's negligence and you lost work because of it, you're probably going to be entitled to collect money for your lost wages. So, how do you actually do the math to calculate that? Well, if you're a hourly worker, it's pretty straightforward. You figure out how many hours of work you missed and you look at what you make per hour and you do the math. So theoretically, if you earn 15 bucks an hour, you work 8-hour days and you missed 5 days of work, your calculation would be 8 hours times 5 days times $15, and that would be what your claim would be for your personal injury lawsuit. Now, if you regularly work overtime, it's a little more complicated because certainly you want to get the money you would have gotten for overtime, but you can't just say to the insurance adjuster, hey, I worked a lot of overtime, so give me more money. You're actually going to have to prove it. So you want to go get your pay stubs or some summary from your employer that says, hey, you know what, in an average week for the last X amount of months, we would be paying this fine worker, X amount of hours overtime, and an overtime hour was time and a half, double time, whatever it is. Again, it's just a math problem. So if you're a salaried worker, it's a little bit different. In that case, you look at how many days you missed, and you just look at your wages. If you make $52,000 a year, that's about $1,000 a week. If you miss 2 weeks of work, again, you're just doing the math. So the problem is if you're a tip worker, so you get sort of a minimum and then you get your tips on top of it. If you are reporting 100% of your tips, then you can take your IRS forms or your reporting, or all that stuff, and say, hey, look, insurance adjuster, these are all the tips I lost because I used to make this much in tips on top of my salary. So pay me for all that. Lots of people don't actually report 100% of your tips. For reasons we will not discuss right now, but if you don't report your tips and you don't have a way of proving you were making tips, you're probably not going to get that. Now, what are you going to actually use to prove your wages? Well, one of the simple ways that we see a lot is you get a letter from your employer. You say, hey, look, Tom was a great employee. It doesn't have to say that, but he works 40 hours a week. His pay is $16 an hour. He lost 11 days of work. And so the employer does the math and says he lost X amount of dollars, signed employer and position. And that's a pretty good document that shows you missed that kind of time off of work. Lots of times people also use pay stubs, or you can sometimes get a summary printout from, if you have like an ADP or some sort of payroll company, they'll show you what your printout is. And so the claims adjuster can look at that and say, okay, this person made this much money every week, every day, every month, whatever it is. And then they can just run the numbers. So fairly straightforward. Now, where it gets more complicated is what happens in the future. So if you're injured by someone else's negligence, you lost some work, you can do the math and say, hey, I lost this amount of work. But what if you were really, really injured and now you have a claim for future lost earnings? Then what do you do? Well, that's hard because most of us don't have a crystal ball that can say exactly how much time, how much money, and all those other things. So typically in a personal injury lawsuit, you're going to hire an expert, and this expert economist is going to look at what you made before and what you would have made in the future, and then what you probably will make in the future that's lower because of your injuries. And so this kind of expert analysis is a bit time consuming. It does take money. And so if you do have a more complex lawsuit that involves future lost meds, you're probably going to want to talk to a competent lawyer just to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.